Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today. I don't have entry music, but I do have a PowerPoint, which I hope will make up for, it'll be interesting enough to make up for the fact that you're stuck inside and not out in the sunshine today. It's particularly nice to be here in person. A lot of the work that we did in the past, working along with particularly Welsh Government on this theme of Irish Sea cooperation, was done during the sort of COVID lockdown periods, and it was all Zoom, and there's people that I feel I know really well but never met in person, so it was lovely to actually see people in person today. As you've heard, I'm based at the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow, so just across the water. Find the right button to press. That is the right button, yes. But we also now have an office in Delft in the Netherlands, so we keep engaged in EU programmes and what's going on in the sort of wider European context. And I in particularly work on this sort of theme of territorial cooperation, and even though it's kind of got the sort of territory as in sort of land-based link, a lot of that work also involves cooperation across sea spaces and marine areas as well. So in terms of the Irish Sea area, there's obviously a very long, rich history of engagement and exchange across the Irish Sea. The Irish Sea used to be kind of like the motorway that linked the whole area together when transport across land took forever. When you were stuck with a very slow-paced horse, it was faster to go by coracle. But more recently, there's been the very intensive cross-border cooperation, obviously, between Ireland and Northern Ireland, but also alongside that, a lot of engagement and exchanges with wider networks involved in a range of Interreg programs, which connected various bits of the territory around the Irish Sea area to much wider geographies, linking up as far as the very high north of the Arctic, across to Greenland, and down as far as the Atlantic coast of Spain and Portugal. And so through one or other of these programs, or through a combination of them, territories around the Irish Sea were playing this sort of much wider role and had that much wider engagement, and could take the sort of lessons and experience that they have through quite intensive cooperation across the land border in Ireland and Northern Ireland, but link that up. Obviously, we got to the sort of 2020 period when these programs were coming to an end, and that was a very complex political period with huge challenges, complexities, no money, and a lot of uncertainty, and that was really the dominant theme. But when you kind of cut through the uncertainty and looked beyond it, there were a lot of kind of pretty solid foundations there, and key things that, like the shared and common development issues and challenges that these programs were all working towards and these territories were all already working together on, hadn't suddenly gone away, got fixed, or disappeared because of this sort of change in the political context. They were still there. They still needed these sort of joint responses. The partners in this sort of wider Irish Sea area have really recognized experience, engagement, and expertise in making territorial cooperation happen. We've kind of heard a bit already about how sometimes, particularly here, it can be hard to blow your own trumpet. It's not in our programming, same in the west of Scotland as well. But I mean, there's a lot of expertise and strength here, and the programs that lost UK partners missed them, and there was a lot of experience there and resource that was kind of potentially going to be lost. And there was sort of valued relationships that organisations and institutions were keen to retain, and personal friendships through collaborative work that people were keen to keep going. And yeah, there's been huge and dramatic change, but in that, as Lindsay was already saying, there was the opportunity for maybe new angles, new approaches, think of doing something a little bit differently, possibly simpler, particularly when you've got to work with Interreg projects and programs. But yeah, I mean, there was a bit of blind optimism needed, but there was actually sort of solid points that you could kind of return to even amongst all of this major change. So, I mean, most of my presentation is kind of like the Star Wars or Marvel origin story for the DISC project and the sort of the Irish Sea framework, which is in place and sort of contributed to it. And it had its origins there in that sort of change, but also those kind of strengths that were there and a sort of commitment to try and keep things going. But there was also sort of much wider context that was important to take into consideration as well, that just global changes, particularly the sort of mega trends and big pressures that all territories are facing in terms of climate change, green transition, digitalization, demographic aging, and now sort of security issues and things. They're all big issues which need a kind of team and collaborative effort. And they're also very complex and interrelated issues which affect strategic level, national levels, regional levels, and people on the ground as well. So you need these sort of linked up responses to sort of break down maybe silos or make connections. And that sort of integrated response to these big challenges is something that, you know, the UN, the OECD, the EU is always sort of promoting and sort of talking about. So again, that sort of wish to kind of keep pursuing this sort of connected territorial cooperation approach sort of fitted with much wider trends as well. In terms of actual territorial cooperation projects, they can sometimes be relatively small budgets compared to big national sort of sectoral policy interventions. They can be associated with kind of what you would call soft impacts. It's about we built a network, we learned something, we produced a report, or we have knowledge or capacity in the organization, but you maybe couldn't very easily count number of new employees in a business or a big bit of infrastructure that it's built. And sometimes as a result of that, it's kind of quite hard to really spotlight it and go, this is really worth sort of concentrating in and promoting. But based on the work that we did, particularly alongside the Welsh Government, when we were looking at options for a kind of cooperation framework, but also wider research that's been done, these territorial cooperation projects do have sort of identifiable areas of quite specific added value where they bring something extra to what a sort of national government or a region acting on its own could do. In particular, they're good at sort of linking high-level strategic, big framework thoughts about we need to address climate change down through the levels and linking it to communities. And also that relationship back up to connect communities and help inform these big frameworks. They're also a good way to address areas of shared interest that territories have that maybe aren't top of the list within national frameworks, but are very territorially relevant. For example, for sort of coastal communities around the Irish Sea, obviously the Irish Sea matters, but it's not always at the top of the list in a sort of member state, a government's policy statement. It's also a good way for stakeholders, regional authorities, territories, local authorities to sort of build critical mass, to sort of pull together and maybe try something a bit experimental that you couldn't do by yourself because you don't have the resource. You maybe don't have enough sort of support behind the idea, but you know other areas around have a similar interest, and you can sort of share risk, try something new. Or maybe just another good opportunity that has been identified through this sort of collaborative working is sometimes as a confidence boost, where you actually, it's not always about drawing in ideas, it's about sharing ideas or recognizing that you're ahead of the game, and you can then go on and sort of take that further. The whole productive networking and knowledge exchange element to it, it's really hard to measure. It's hard to put a figure against it and say this has brought in X amount of pounds or euros, but it's invaluable when you talk to people involved in working on these projects. The value that has been gained and the knowledge that has been shared is always kind of at the top of the list of when you're asking people about what they got from the process. And it helps them ultimately maybe work more effectively, more efficiently, and improve systems. It's also been quite valuable in supporting innovation. As I've said, you can sometimes sort of risk share on trying something new, a new way of providing a service or something like that. Can pilot things, test things, trial techniques. And it's been quite valuable, particularly when budgets are tight, to be able to sort of pool those resources and help fund trying out new things, particularly because there's so much change linked to digitalization and so on, that things are moving fast, and it's quite good to have a sort of mechanism to help keep pace with that. And also linked to that sort of forward planning that you don't always get a chance to easily do in a sort of day-to-day basis. It's quite difficult to sometimes take a step back and go 10 years down the line, where do we want to be? But events like this, you do get an opportunity to think bigger and sort of exchange on those kind of more forward-looking ideas. So there was this sort of, rationale and sort of drive towards sort of retaining some sort of engagement in territorial cooperation. And another element of the work that we did was to sort of look at territorial cooperation arrangements. As I've said, there has been this heavy engagement in quite formalized interreg programs in the past, and still in Northern Ireland. In Ireland, there's the Peace Plus programme, which is kind of key to cross-border cooperation as well as wider links. But it's not the only game in town, and there are lots of other ways to engage and participate in territorial cooperation. The examples up there, I'll not go through them all, but it was just to kind of illustrate the range and the sort of different styles there are. Some are linked to funding, they have set programs, they have indicators, they have audit, they have all the fun that goes with that. But other ones are much more sort of loose, flexible frameworks, where it's about bringing people together at conferences, looking to sort of leverage influence and link into other types of funding or other initiatives. And sort of understanding that territorial cooperation didn't have to be tied to these very, very, very intensive, complex frameworks. At the time we were working was quite an important sort of takeaway. And taking that sort of list there, I mean, that's just a tiny snapshot of the different arrangements that are in place across particularly Europe. But as a whole, it kind of underlined, again, the fact that territorial cooperation has this kind of profile. It's quite widely valued, it's sought after, and that's demonstrated by the fact there are all these different frameworks about. There are a lot of different sort of entry points and approaches. As I've said, some are more formalized than others. But these can also be quite flexible and evolving networks and arrangements. They can accommodate different levels of commitment. You don't have to come with a huge bag of money and say, we're in. There is a sort of gentler engagement that can happen. And another point was that these cooperation initiatives can coexist quite happily. There can be quite a lot of concern about overlaps and are we treading on this framework's toes, or if we say something, is that going to, get in the way of this program, and how do you make it fit? But when you look into how these things actually work in practice, there's a lot of connections where maybe there's a framework that links to a small pilot project that then links to a bigger project funded through an Interreg program that then links to a more academic piece of work through an academic exchange network. And there is this sort of ecosystem around it. So particularly when we were thinking about something new in this Irish Sea framework, there was a recognition that you're not coming into this blank space. There's a lot going on, but you can fit and sort of complement what's there. Just to bring things up to date, as I've said, a lot of this work was done sort of around 2021, 2022. But as was said in the introduction, I've just finished a piece of work for the European Commission, looking again specifically at territorial cooperation, particularly the Interreg programs that the EU funds, but also taking a kind of wider view about how they fit in this kind of wider cooperation environment. There's huge budget negotiations going on at EU level, and again, we're back into this. There's lots of uncertainty, there's lots of complexity, there's lots of change, and So, which actually is coming from my background. I was like, yeah, cool, I'm okay with that. I can handle uncertainty. But again, these consultations involve stakeholders and citizens that were involved in territorial cooperation throughout the sort of whole EU, but also much wider, including programs that covered overseas territories down the Caribbean, the Indian Ocean, a huge geography. And the key messages coming from them and the sort of overview report that I prepared was, again, this sort of appetite for more cooperation, not less. Yeah, it can be complicated, but we can work with that, and there was still that appetite for wanting to do more, and not just wanting to do more, but a really strong realization that they need to do more based on what's going on in the world at the moment. There were also sort of more themes that people wanted to cooperate on, sort of big themes like security, not necessarily funding armies, but how secure people felt in their communities and their regions, linked to sort of well-being and so on. Also other issues like housing. There was also a particular sort of call for more flexibility, make it simpler and make it more agile and responsive, given all of the huge changes that had been going on over the last sort of 7-year period. Interestingly, there was also a lot of call for geographic flexibility. These Interreg programs each have their own boundaries, and they are allowed to cooperate a bit out with those boundaries, but there was an appetite to do that even more. And that's something that, again, there's experience of here, and there's a lot of sort of strength and knowledge on that because, for example, the Peace Plus program is now through this DISC project engaging more widely already. There has also been a lot of links to Scotland, linked to previous links that were there through the cross-border program that used to be around, and the whole idea of working in sort of areas that work for certain themes and functional areas has been quite an important one. And there was also this sort of recurring thing of we need to make this territorial cooperation process as simple and easy as possible, but they say that every time and they never quite manage it. But anyway, so that was all quite a sort of long intro into the kind of like, why is this sort of important and why is it still important to do? And we did a lot of this kind of scene setting a bit, linked to work that we did with the Welsh Government, which preceded the sort of development and evolution of the Irish Sea framework. We also looked at sort of specific areas of activity where there were sort of shared areas of interest across the Welsh, Northern Irish, Irish, and also English. I'm using the word regions, but there aren't really regions in England, but you kind of know what I mean, the areas around the Irish Sea. But we also looked at areas where there was already a kind of strong base of engagement linked to previous projects that had been funded. And the report that we produced a few years ago sort of highlighted the areas of sort of green development, particularly renewable energy, circular economy, decarbonisation, as well as sort of wider environmental protection. Obviously, blue growth, the clue being it's all about the Irish Sea, was a bit of a no-brainer when it came to including that one, but also recognising the really strong work that was already ongoing. But there was also a lot of opportunities maybe around sort of social development issues around sort of coastal island communities, also core areas linked to sort of research and innovation, particularly life sciences. And again, as we were working during COVID, the health was kind of at the forefront of your mind. And also just sort of more widely, sort of culture communities linked to sort of coastal community resilience, opportunities around tourism and so on. And that then sort of distilled down a bit when the Irish Sea framework was eventually sort of set out, and sort of came up with these sort of three broad groups, which fit obviously well with the sort of core areas of interest for the DISC project. But they were also big, large-scale issues, and but you could also see a huge amount of potential in sort of quite manageable, practical cooperation around sort of foresight, planning, testing, trialling ideas, as I've said, but also these pursuing wider synergies and leveraging links and connections to other forms of cooperation. So at that time, there was, as I've said, this kind of bit of a black hole in terms of what do we do and how do we sort of come up with a framework that can at least sort of move forward a little bit and can exist in this sort of quite complex and dynamic time period. And the idea was just to come up with something that was really pragmatic, very practical, work with what we have and recognize what was not there, money being a key part of that. But there was definitely no shortage of willingness. And sort of a second element was to be sort of very open and aware of all the flexibility and the different options and models of cooperation that was out there. And in particular, that sort of flexible approach that the Irish Sea framework adopted, and its focus on sort of supporting, maximising, leveraging links has proved to be, I think, quite a sort of valuable addition to the network of cooperation that's going on at the moment, and as hopefully we will go on to discuss today, has helped contribute to much more cooperation in the future. So I can complete the little timeline now and replace the question mark with a tangible project logo, which is good to complement the other ones that are there from the previous Interreg project. I think there's other ones like Kaelin and things that will be talked about in some of the workshops So I really look forward to hearing the rest of the discussions as the day progresses. So thanks very much.